Hello, dear students. Welcome back. Uh, in our last day's class, we have discussed from the chapter of human circulatory system about the blood. So, in today's class, what we are going to look into is the other units which are present in the human circulatory system. That is, first we will discuss about the blood vessels. Okay, and then first we will discuss about here the blood vessels. Okay, followed by the blood vessels, we will look into the heart, and after the heart we will again come back to unite all of them together to form and understand how basically this circulatory system works, especially in relation to our heart. Okay, so let's begin and let's look into the different components one by one. Okay, now first the blood vessels. Now see, as we talk about human circulatory system, right, some important things that you need to remember here is there are three basic types of blood vessels. Now have a look into this. Arteries, you have the veins, and you have the capillaries. Okay, so you have the vein, you have the capillaries, and you have the arteries. So if you look into this particular figure, what you can see, you have the heart here. Okay, and the blood is moving out of the heart, right, entering into a particular blood vessel called aorta, then comes down to certain blood vessels which we have named as arteries, and from the arteries arterioles are formed, and from the arterioles capillaries are formed. The capillaries again reunite to form the venules joins to form the veins, and then the vena cava, finally back to heart. So this is basically the circuit. So it's basically the circuit, and in this circuit one cycle has been completed. So you started from where did you start from? Heart. And where did you come and end? Back to heart. So you have completed one cycle. Okay, so how many blood vessels are making the whole of the story possible? Here you have the arteries. Okay, what arteries? Let's understand about them. So these are blood vessels. Okay, these are blood vessels which carries blood from the heart. Okay, from the heart, these are blood vessels that carries blood from the heart to a particular organ. Say you have an organ here, and in this organ the blood needs to be brought. So from the heart till the organ, who is bringing it? These are arteries. So you have different kinds of arteries in your body and different magnitudes of arteries on the basis of their diameter. Okay, so we'll discuss about all these things. Now coming back, if you look into the blood vessels, the blue color ones, so what are they doing? They are basically returning the blood back to your heart, right? They're returning it. So what should you call them? You should call them the veins. Okay, now in between the arteries and the veins, so if I consider this to be the arteries, okay, these are the veins. In between them, we can see a certain group of blood vessels which will be called as capillaries. Clear? Okay, so three categories are there: arteries, veins, and you have your capillaries. Now let's move on to understand about each of them. Have a look into the different types of blood vessels. Have a look into the different types of blood vessels. So first category, what do we have? Arteries. They are large vessels that carry blood away from the heart to the tissues, okay, of the body, except for the pulmonary arteries. So please remember, the pulmonary arteries are an exception here. So please remember about that. They are an exception to this. Now, all arteries actually carry what type of blood? Oxygen-rich blood. Very, very important. Now, next we have the veins. Have a look into this. The veins, they return the blood back to the heart. Okay. Many have got certain unique structures which are called as valves that doesn't allow the blood to return back or prevents backflow. So if you look into these figures that you have, okay, this, then this, and this, they show the different magnitudes of the blood vessels, where you can see that the blood vessels undergo extensive branching. Okay, so if this is considered to be the main branch, say if this is the main branch, they are undergoing what? Extensive branching in your body. Now they form different diameters, and gradually the diameters keeps on decreasing, and finally what we get is the capillaries. So they are the smallest blood vessels that you have. Okay, and they are so thin, in fact they allow they are the one which can allow, you know, the exchange of materials like oxygen, the nutrients, okay, so that they can pass from the blood into the tissues. Even the waste can be removed from the tissues into the blood. Okay, so here what we have seen is all about the different categories of blood vessels, and in them what we have seen is there are three categories. The first one being arteries, the second one being vein, and the third is actually your capillaries, right? So if you look into all the three categories, what idea can you derive from here is they are all united. They are not exactly separated from each other, right? So let's move on to the next. Let's understand some basic differences in between arteries, veins, and let's understand how basically do they differ in their structure first. Okay, then we will come to the capillaries in details. Now, I already told you that the direction is basically different in both. So if you consider the veins, they always bring the blood towards the heart. Okay, now when you consider the arteries, they always carry the blood away from the heart. Now next, when you look into some more important differences, the nature of blood which is being carried by the veins, they are always, yes, deoxygenated. Now the next one, if you look into the arteries, they carry oxygen rich blood which is called as oxygenated blood. Now if you look into the walls of the veins, okay, so veins are basically just like your pipe, so they are comparatively thinner in comparison to your arteries. Now lumen is basically the space which is enclosed by the walls of arteries as well as veins, because if you look into a pipe, for example, say if you look into a pipe, say here you have a pipe, okay, and say this is the wall that you can see. So this particular thing that you have here, okay, this will act as what? The wall. Got my point? And what should this act as? This is actually your lumen. So let's understand whose lumen is basically, you got it? Whose lumen is basically wider and whose is actually more narrow. So for this, let's quickly look into this. Now, they have a large lumen and they have a small lumen, right? Now, next point that we need to remember is about the blood pressure. So the blood pressure, which you can see here, that is in case of the vein, is usually less or on the lower side. And arteries, they have a higher blood pressure. Clear? Now, let's look into one more. As I already mentioned, the walls are thinner, and if you look into this vein, you can make it very clearly. Now, normally what you can see is the blood vessels basically have three muscular walls. Now, this is one, okay, and you have another inner one, right? So we have different names given to them, okay. This outermost is called as externa, then you have the media, then you have the intima. Now this vein, okay, this vein, they have fewer elastic fibers. Please remember. So they are not that elastic. But if you compare them with the artery, they are comparatively thicker. Have a look into this wall. They are comparatively much thicker, isn't it? So they have much thicker walls, right? Now, let's look into some more important differences. Where are veins found? Veins are very close to the surface of the body. Okay. What about the arteries? They're found deep inside the body. Okay. And if you look into the capillaries, the next, okay, before that, let's quickly have a look into the last point. That is, I already told you there is presence of veins. And the veins, what do you have? Valves. Okay. So there is presence of valves here. Where do you find the valves? In the vein. And arteries, they do not have it. Okay. So absent. Now, let's look into the capillaries. So if you look into the capillaries, in fact, the capillaries, they are the smallest blood vessels that you have or that you can have. Now, they being the smallest, okay, smallest of all the blood vessels, okay, they have the most interesting thing that you should know here. Now, what is that interesting thing? Please have a look. If you look into their wall, there are only single cells that you can find here. So if you look into their wall, they are basically having single cells here, right? So these are basically single cells. So you have single cells. So this is also another single cell, right? So in this way, what you can see, the thickness is just single cell. Now, if you take the diameter of this, roughly it will be close to 7 micron to 8 micron, which is approximately the diameter of your RBC. So if you compare your RBC, okay, and if you look into your RBC, just one RBC can actually pass at a time through these capillaries. Okay, just one RBC. So I believe it is clear to everyone, right? So if you look into the point that we wanted to establish here, okay, is they have a very small lumen, and this lumen allows only one cell to pass at a time. So no cells are far from a capillary. No cells are far from a capillary. Their walls are just one cell thick, and the most narrowest type of blood vessels which you can have in your body. So very important point that you need to remember here is through these capillary gaps, I mean the cells which you have here, okay, exchange of substances actually takes place. Okay, so when we talk about the capillaries, this is a very important point, and capillaries have certain basic important functions. What are those? The capillaries are the exchange vessels. This is where you are exchanging different substances, like say when we talk about your oxygen, okay, when you talk about your carbon dioxide, when you talk about your nutrients, okay, all these substances you are basically exchanging right here. And another important thing that you need to remember is when you talk about the exchange, okay, when you talk about the exchange, you need to remember that waste from tissues, okay, they are also exchanged right here. Okay, they are also exchanged right here. So if you talk about the capillaries, in fact, what we can understand is the capillaries, they are acting as what? The exchange unit in between the cells and the tissues with respect to your blood. Now, remember one very important point about them: they bring nutrients and oxygen to the tissues of the body. They absorb carbon dioxide and the waste products, okay, from the cells, and bring these compounds away from the cells so that they can be eliminated or disposed or discarded from the body. So these are some basic functions of your capillaries in your body. So how many types of blood vessels did we look into right till now? 3 types: arteries, we have the veins, and we have the capillaries. Now, if you look into this figure, which has been taken from your book, it will give you a clear idea about how the whole of the story is being done. So if you look into this side, this is basically your arteriole. Okay, what are these? These are arteriole. Now, what are arterioles? These are smaller branches of arteries. Okay, they are bringing the oxygen-rich blood, and you can see they are branching into small, minute, you know, blood vessels. And these minute blood vessels are what we call as the capillaries. Now, these capillaries, which has been formed, right? These capillaries which has been formed, okay, they have different cells, and you can see a space. So you have the extracellular space here. So their waste will be accumulated in this blood, and gradually you can see the color of the blood is also changing. So it was oxygenated, and now it enters into the venule. The blood becomes bluish in color, right, according to this given figure. So what is it trying to explain? It is trying to explain this particular story, that how oxygen-rich blood has entered, and it has basically become sort of like impure. Okay, the percentage of oxygen has dropped here, percentage of carbon dioxide or dissolved carbon dioxide has gone up here. Okay, so clear, na? So the exchange is basically taking place exactly in this particular unit, and this particular unit is what we call as the capillaries, right? Now, next we move on to the heart. The most important organ that you can have in your body in context to in context to sorry so the heart, basically what you can see is the pumping organ of your body, and one of the most important organ that you can have in your body. Now let's look into some important facts about the heart. So if you look into some important facts about the heart, you can see they are located where? Where are they located? They are basically located on the thoracic cavity. Thoracic cavity is the cavity which is enclosed right here by the diaphragm, the rib cage that you have, the lungs that you have. Okay, so this upper region is basically called as the thoracic cavity. And within this thoracic cavity, you have got two lungs. You can see them, two important structures. Now, these two lungs that you have, okay, their function is to perform the gaseous exchange. Okay, now what is the size of your heart? Approximately, it's the size of your fist, right hand fist that you have. You understand what is your fist? Mutti. Okay, so right hand fist approximately have a weight of 300 gram, and most important thing is it is surrounded by a protective membrane that is called as pericardium. Now please remember that the heart has a specific type of muscle, and that is called as cardiac muscle. So this is for you, and this is a picture of actually the real heart. Okay, this is the picture of the real heart that you have. Okay, so let's move on to understand about the heart in a little bit more detail. So what I said, the heart is basically made of what? Muscles. And these muscles, which makes the heart, is commonly called as myocardium. So you have to remember this myocardium. Now they can produce powerful contractions to pump the blood across the whole circulatory system. Now the human heart has how many chambers? We will come to the structure. 4 chambers are there. Okay, a wall called septum usually separates them into right and left side. Okay, and one each side of the septum are having upper as well as lower chamber. So if you look into this particular figure, this gives you a clear idea about what we are trying to talk about. Okay, so if you have a look into this particular figure, you get a clear idea about what we are trying to talk about. So this is upper chamber, this is another upper chamber, this is another upper chamber, this is look into the heart, you will have the 4 chambers clearly seen. So these two are upper chambers that you can see, and these two are lower chambers. Now the upper chambers, we call them as what? What is the name given to them? the name that we give to them is basically atrium. What do we call them? Atrium. So the upper chambers are called as atrium and the lower chambers are called as ventricles. Okay, what do we call them? Ventricles. Clear? Now you can very clearly see there is a pericardium, which is a protective covering around the heart, right? So, and you will see a fluid which is present over here, that is called as pericardial fluid, which is enclosed in this cavity, and the cavity is called as pericardial cavity. Okay, and after that you can see the thick muscles that you have in your heart, and these thick muscles are none other than myocardium. Please remember about that. So they are called as myocardium. Okay, so this gives us a clear idea about how your heart uh, looks like in the internal anatomy. We are going to look into the same thing in more details in the next upcoming stories or upcoming slides. Okay, so let's look into the next one. This will give us a clear idea about it. So you can have a look here. Each upper chamber is called as atrium. Please remember, plural is atria, and they are basically the receiving chambers of the heart, and each lower chamber is called as ventricle, and they pump the blood out of the heart. So you have both of them, as I mentioned in the previous slide. So right atrium, left atrium on the left side. Okay, and this is your right ventricle, this is your left ventricle. So this is a real picture of the heart, and you can understand where a surgeon is basically working on the heart. And if you cut the heart, okay, if you cut the heart, this is a longitudinal section that you have made, and if you cut the heart in the planar view, okay, you will get some structures which are called as valves in them, and these valves can be clearly seen. Now the flap of connective tissue called valves are located between the atria and the ventricles, so you can see them very clearly. So these structures which are present, these are called as valves. So there are beautiful figures which are coming up for you to understand about the valves. So the tissues, the flap of connective tissues, which are called as valves, are actually located in between the atrium and the ventricle. Atrium and the ventricle. So on the left side you have left atrium, left ventricle. Right side you have right atrium, right ventricle. Okay, clear? Now the valves actually open and close, but they open only in one direction, and therefore they allow the flow of the blood only in one direction. And what do they prevent? They can prevent backflow. Okay, they can prevent what? Backflow. Very important. Now the heart actually pumps blood through two basic pathways. Okay, we will talk about this. First one is pulmonary circulation, and we have the second one, which is called as systemic circulation. So first is your pulmonary, second is your systemic circulation. Now what is this? Okay, please understand pulmonary circuit and systemic circuit. So I'll be explaining this. So please remember that the pulmonary circuit is in between the heart and the lungs. Okay, so it pumps the blood from the heart to the lungs and back from the lungs into the heart. Okay, so blood picks up oxygen, goes after going to the lungs. What do? They basically pick up the oxygen, and after that they release the carbon dioxide over there and comes back to the heart. Now once this blood returns back to the heart, that particular blood is considered as oxygenated blood. Now if you come to the systemic circulation, what will you see? Systemic circulation starts from the ventricle. Okay, so it will start from the ventricle. Which ventricle exactly? Left ventricle. Okay, we will see that. So systemic circulation basically pumps the blood from the heart to the rest of the body, and thereby supplying all the necessary items required by the cells. So the cells basically get oxygen, they get loads of, they get loaded with the nutrients, okay, through this particular circuit. So you have two important circuits in human circulatory system, and that is one of the reason we call the human circulatory system as double circuit circulation, right? So let's come back to the structure of the heart. So you can see a very beautiful figure of the heart, and this is a superficial view. That means upper. If you look into the heart from the top, in fact, without cutting it, you will see the different blood vessels as well as the membrane that we have discussed. So, and if you look into this particular figure in a slightly enlarged version, you will be able to understand about the blood vessels that I told you just now. So, if you very quickly look into this particular figure, you will be able to find this is a slightly bluish type of blood vessels, this is a slightly reddish type of blood vessels, right? Now, if you look into this particular blood vessel, what you can see, can you identify the atria here? This is your right atria, okay? And on this side, what do you have? This is your left atria, okay? This is your left atria. So these upper chambers are called as atria, you remember, and these are your ventricles. So on this side, you have the right ventricle, and this side you have the left ventricle. Now, very quickly, if you look into this particular figure, you will understand a very interesting thing is there are a lot of blood vessels which are actually coming out and entering back. Now, you can see all these vena cavas. Okay, you can look into this. You have two of the vena cavas. They are basically bringing all the blood back. They are bringing all the blood back to the heart. Exactly where? In the right atrium. Clear? And if you look into the other side means the left side of your heart, what you can see is the presence of arteries, and these arteries are what we call as pulmonary. Sorry, these are actually your pulmonary veins, not arteries. There will be your pulmonary veins. Okay, now these pulmonary veins, what are they doing? They're receiving the blood from where? Where is this blood coming from? This blood is actually coming from where? They're coming from the lungs. And who took them to the lungs? Who took them to the lungs? You have two lungs. Who took them to the lungs? Okay, this is the blood vessel who has basically taken it to the lungs. What is the name of this? The name of this is basically pulmonary artery. What is the name of this? Pulmonary artery. So what is this pulmonary artery doing? It is taking all the blood which is impure. You can see it's blue in color, impure, to the lungs. It gets the deoxygenated blood oxygenated by liberating the carbon dioxide and picking up oxygen from the lungs, and thereby it becomes oxygenated and returns back where? Here. What is the name of this? It is the left atrium. And once it returns back to the left atrium, okay, the blood is pushed, in fact, due to the contraction of the heart, it is returned down or pushed down into the left ventricle. Don't forget you have got valves here. Now, internally we will see this working, but before that, let us understand what is present on the top. If you look into the surface of the heart, you can see certain blue color blood vessels and you can see certain red color blood vessels. Now, these blue color blood vessels are veins, and this red color blood vessels are basically arteries. So these blood vessels, coronary artery and coronary veins, what do? They are exclusive blood vessels. The artery only supplies blood to whom? The heart muscles, and the vein collects blood from whom? All the heart muscles. Okay, so please understand that the heart internally do not utilize nutrients present in the blood internally. Okay, they have to be externally supplied with separate blood vessels for their requirement. Okay, now have a look into this particular very important point. What is this particular point trying to explain? This particular point is trying to explain that the heart is a hollow organ which is enclosed where? Which is enclosed in a protective sac which is called as tissue, protective sac of tissue which is called as pericardium. Now, the pericardium, okay, is a protective membrane, and this protective membrane is responsible for what type of protection? Heart is already inside your body. What type of protection is it going to provide? See, I told you there is a fluid. Remember, pericardial fluid. Now, this pericardial fluid, what is it going to do? Is going to see the heart is continuously contracting, and to reduce the friction, because the moment you contract there is a chance of friction with the rest of the adjacent organs. So to reduce this friction, the pericardial fluid is going to play a very important role. And who is holding this pericardial fluid? It is the pericardium. So in the walls of the heart, two layers of epithelial and connective tissues form a thick muscle which is called as your myocardium. Now, contractions of the myocardium results in pumping of the heart. Okay, so the pumping of the blood from the heart is due to this myocardium. Please remember. So the myocardium is a very, very important structure, and the myocardium plays a very significant role in when it comes to contraction activity of the heart. Now, let's move on to understand some important things once again. So right atrium, right ventricle. Please remember, these are the two chambers that you have on the right side. On the left side, you have left atrium on the top, left ventricle on the bottom. Now, this is going to explain it in a much better way. So this is a sectional view of the heart. Here you have it from your book, and right atrium is the top one. Okay, and right ventricle is what we can see on the bottom side, as I already told you just now, right? Now, the next important thing that you have is to be noted, and that is this particular figure from your book. So we will talk about this in a minute, but look into this point. The heart has four chambers, as I already told you. Two of them are atria and two of them are ventricles. There are two chambers on each side of the septum. Which one is the septum? This is your septum. Okay, and the upper chambers, they are only receiving blood. They do not pump out or eject out the blood, or they are never distributing the blood. And the lower chambers are responsible for distributing the blood by pumping out the blood. Okay, so who is actually doing the pumping action? It is the ventricles. And who is receiving the blood? It is basically the auricles. In fact, the atriums are also called as auricles. Okay, now let's look into this particular figure, and let's quickly understand about some important things that we have been discussing till now. So have a look into this. Okay, this is your upper chamber. This is your upper chamber that you can see, and we have called this upper chamber as, yes, what is the name that we have given it? As right atrium. We have called it as what? Right atrium. Okay, now on this side, what should you have? Left auricle. Okay, or left atrium is the same thing. For the time being, you understand this as this. Now, next, if you come to the lower chambers, what you can see is the left ventricle which is present, right ventricle on the right side. As simple as that. Now, this side you have got a valve which is called as tricuspid valve. This side means on the right atrium and the right ventricle, they are basically separated by tricuspid valve. On this side, that is on the left side of your heart, okay, what can you see? Left auricle, left ventricle, upper and lower chambers, they are basically separated by the bicuspid valve. Okay, now you can see some more valves which are located here and here. Okay, so who are these? Let's identify these blood vessels first. These blood vessel which is going out from the left, going out from where? The left. It's going out from where? The left. The left ventricle. This would be your aorta. And the one which is actually going out from here, that is your right ventricle. This is supposed to be known as pulmonary artery. It is going to take the blood to the lungs. Now, if you talk about the rest of the blood vessels that we can see, one is blue in color. I already explained this, if you remember. These are superior vena cava, bringing all the impure blood from structures above your heart. And this side you have the inferior vena cava that basically collects all the deoxygenated blood, impure blood from where? From the lower part of your body, below the heart. Okay. Now, as we have been discussing about a very, very important structure here that separates the heart into what we have known till now, okay, into chambers. This is what we call as septum. So this is basically a dividing wall that you can see on both the sides. Here also on the top you have it. Now, if it is present in between ventricles, you will call this as interventricular. Inter means in between. Okay. Similarly, on the top, you are going to find interauricular septum, right? So interauricular, interventricular, both the types of the septums are present. Clear? So interventricular and interauricular, these are the two important septums. Now, what are the most important points that you have to remember for your identification during your exam? Okay. In fact, you need to practice this particular drawing at your home so that you clearly develop the idea about the different components of the heart and the different structural components of your heart, right? Now, after understanding about the structure of the heart, let's look into the valves of heart in a little bit more details. So, as I already mentioned, you have two important types of valves, okay? Bicuspid valve and tricuspid valve. If you remember, tricuspid is present on the right side, bicuspid is present on the left side. In between whom and whom, it is in between the auricle and the ventricle. So what is their function is to prevent backflow into into the atria, and they are held in place by structures which are called as tendons. Okay. Now the semilunar valves are valves which are located in the blood vessels like aorta, as well as where do you find it? In the pulmonary artery. They prevent the backflow into the ventricles. So please remember, this is very important point. Now, what is the function of the septum? The septum divides the right side of the heart from the left. Okay. It prevents a very, very important thing, that is mixing of the deoxygenated blood with the oxygenated blood. So if you look into this particular figure, you will get a clear idea that impure bloods are basically present on the right side of your heart, and pure blood is basically present on the left side of your heart. And this septum is not allowing it to get mixed. Now, let's talk about the auricles. So if you talk about the auricles, they are basically receiving the blood. This side you have right atrium, this side you have left atrium. Okay. Now you can see it passes the blood, or in fact it pushes the blood due to its contraction into the right ventricle and the left ventricles. Okay. And after that, what happens is the same blood enters due to the contraction of the ventricles into pulmonary artery, and from pulmonary artery, where is it going to go? It is into the lungs. Okay. Where is it going to go? It's going to get into the lungs, right? And on the other side, what you can see, from the left ventricle, it enters into the aorta, and from the aorta into the rest of the body. So you got this point. Now let's move on to the next one. And these are the ventricles. Now ventricles are comparatively thicker, you can see. Whereas if you look into the left ventricle, it is comparatively more thicker than the right side. This is your septum. Okay, let's look into the story of the ventricles. From the right atrium, right ventricle. Okay, from the left atrium, left ventricle. From here, right ventricle is basically going to push it into the pulmonary artery. Remember, this is pulmonary artery. And from pulmonary artery into the lungs. On the other side, left ventricle is going to push it into the aorta, and from the aorta, it is going to get distributed into the rest of the part of your body. Now, ventricles are muscular and they are comparatively thicker than the auricles. Okay, left ventricle is the thickest. In fact, they have thick muscular walls. Now, let's quickly talk about the circulation through the heart that we have just discussed. Okay, and in fact we are going to summarize it. So who brings the blood to the heart? The first answer to this is the large veins, and these large veins are called as vena cava, brings the blood back to the heart from the rest of the body. This enter either into the right atrium. Okay, this enter into the right atrium through two vena cavas. In fact, the two vena cavas also we have discussed: superior vena cava, that is bringing it from the region above the heart, and inferior vena cava from the region lower than the heart, okay, below the heart. Now as the heart contracts, what is going to happen? See, the heart can contract and remain relaxed, right? So as the heart contracts, blood flows from the atria into the ventricles. Okay, now after that what happens is then the ventricles pumps the blood out of the heart into the two large arteries, namely aorta and pulmonary artery. Now blood then starts moving to the either the body or into the lungs for getting purified, right? Now have a look into this. We have already discussed the two important circuits of the circulation, okay? That is the blood circulation in human being can be divisible into two circuits, pulmonary and systemic circuit, right? Now if you look into this particular figure, it will explain the whole of the story that we have discussed till now. So this is basically the summary of the whole story that we have here. Now quickly, let us understand about this particular figure, and let's make out things which we need to remember and understand. So if you look into this particular figure, this is where your heart is. So this is your upper chamber, right? And this is your lower chamber, this is your lower chamber. Now from here, what happens? Who is bringing the blood here? Who is bringing the blood? The vena cavas are bringing the blood. Okay, so both of the vena cavas are bringing the blood. Now what do you call this vena cava which is bringing the blood? We call it as superior vena cava. What do we call this vena cava as? We call this as inferior vena cava. You remember, inferior and superior vena cavas, right? So these are the two vena cavas. So this is your inferior vena cava, this is your superior vena cava. Clear? Now after the blood reaches here, okay, what happens is this ventricle will contract, and once this ventricle contracts, okay, what is going to happen is this blood is going to now go out where? Into the lungs. Where is it going to go? It is going to get into the lungs. Okay, now I have shown you this yellow arrow. It's actually a blood vessel which is behind it, not this one, okay, that I have shown in red. Okay, so there are actually two blood vessels here. There should be two blood vessels. In fact, these are the vena cavas. So inferior vena cava bringing blood, superior vena cava bringing blood. Okay, and this blood vessel which is called as pulmonary artery, it is taking the blood to the lungs. For what purpose? For giving all its impurities, in fact the carbon dioxide, and picking up oxygen, and then thereby becomes oxygenated. And once it becomes oxygenated, this will start returning back by what? Pulmonary vein. So this is one remarkable difference that you have to remember, that we have studied all arteries carry what? Oxygenated blood. But what can we see? This particular artery is carrying deoxygenated blood. Now if you look into these veins, veins usually carry what? Deoxygenated blood. But what is this particular vein carrying? Pure blood, right? Or pure or oxygenated blood, right? Now, so this pure blood is entering where? Where is it entering? It is entering into the left atrium. Okay, now from the left atrium, the blood will enter down. It will reach the left ventricle. And from the left ventricle, what is going to happen is this blood is going to go out through the aorta. Okay, so as it goes out through the aorta, it will get distributed, okay, into different organs. And what is it going to make for this? So this is an artery. It's going to break into arterioles. Okay, this is your arterioles. Now the arterioles are going to branch into capillaries, and the capillaries are now going to reunite to form venules, and the venules now will reunite, okay, to form larger or greater veins, in fact, which are called as vena cava. So you can see all the deoxygenated bloods are basically getting accumulated from the different parts of the body. Okay, so you have the oxygenated blood coming down, entering into different organs. Okay, so what you can see, please make this particular point uh, very important, and please remember this particular thing, that you have one circuit once you are going out of your heart from here, entering into the lungs, completing your exchange and returning back to your heart. So this is your circuit number 1. Okay, and again what is going to happen is, from the heart you are coming out through the aorta. Okay, entering into different organs, entering into different organs, entering into different organs. Okay, again you are bringing out the blood and returning back to your heart. So you are completing the second circuit. So what is the name of the second circuit and the first circuit? What was the name that was used? If you remember, the first circuit is called as the first circuit, that is this one that we have discussed just now. Okay, which occurs in between the heart and lungs. Okay, what do we call it? We call it the pulmonary circuit. Okay, this is your pulmonary circuit. So this is the first circuit which occurs in between heart and lungs. Now the next circuit, or the second circuit that you have, what is that? The second circuit is basically in between your heart and rest of the organs. Okay, rest of the organs. And this organs will not include whom? Lungs will not be included, because we have already included the lungs. So this second circuit is what we call as systemic circuit. Systemic circuit. So how many circuits did you see? 2 circuits are there, and that is the reason we call our circulation as double circuit. Okay, circulation. So human circulation is considered as double circuit circulation for this particular reason. Okay, I believe till this much it is absolutely clear to you. Okay, now we will look into the rest of the part that we have in our next part, or in our next day's class. Okay, so thank you everyone, take care.